It is the Motor City, but the economic engines in Detroit aren't humming like they once did, as you know. The shrinking of the auto industry, coupled with some terrible management, fiscal oversight, lack thereof, it's led to some very hard times. Then people began to leave, and in huge numbers. Then the city couldn't afford to pay its bills and declared bankruptcy. This week, a federal judge approved the bankruptcy plan, a first step, many suspect, to the city breaking its deal with city pensioners, former employees who had planned that money to fund their futures. They could be out of luck and in for some hardships of their own. Now, things in Detroit so bad, many say they should close their art museum and sell off some of the priceless works that they held just to try to make ends meet. And of course, there's even bigger worries. That is what is happening in Detroit. Could it become a new normal? And not just for the Motor City, that cities in our region, like, for example, Syracuse, could follow suit, making municipal bankruptcy far less of a toxic choice for civic leaders. And for answers now, let's bring our next guest, James Parrott. He, the Deputy Director and Chief Economist at the Fiscal Policy Institute in New York. And James, I know you got an event coming up, so I appreciate you making some time for us. What about that? I've spoken to Richard Brodsky about this more than a few times, and he says this could be a canary in the coal mine because now the stigma of a major city like Detroit having gone through it, other cities, especially those in Western New York and industrial cities like the Uticas of the world, they might say, why don't we follow suit? Is there a real possibility?
Well, you know, lots of cities have had economic problems. Detroit, you know, had tremendous economic problems, big population decline, big outmigration of the auto industry over the years. But fundamentally, what's going on in Detroit is a decision of the state of Michigan to let that city go under and to put it in a position where they can try and rip up the guarantees for pension security, retirement security for public sector workers. So it's really a matter of it's a choice, it's a policy choice of the state of Michigan to do that. These liabilities that Detroit have are long-term liabilities. They do have a short-term cash flow problem, which has been exacerbated greatly by Michigan cutting back on state aid to Detroit. So it's a situation that could have been avoided entirely. Now, it does have implications, you know, for other cities and states around the country, but it's a question of whether or not a state is going to seek to work with localities to address their liabilities and their cash flow needs, rather than push them into a situation like this.
We hear so many cities who say the pension obligations are just unsustainable for us in the medium and the long term, let alone the immediate. But to that point, do you think, we saw this in Wisconsin certainly, where we're seeing this obviously play out in Detroit right now, that the unions are going to have to say, we got to capitulate here. It's better get something than nothing. Look what's happening in Detroit. How much of this will be driven off of pension and those obligations that they say we just don't have the revenues to meet anymore?
You know, the cash flow problems that are the occasion for Detroit's having a financial problem right now, that's not a result of pension obligations increasing a lot in recent years. These are pension obligations that have built up over a long period of time. They're the deferred compensation of the workers. In Wisconsin, it wasn't state workers refusing to bargain with the state. It was that the governor of that state, like the governor of Michigan, is deciding that here's an opportunity to scapegoat public sector workers, to use the occasion of financial problems, challenges, not a crisis that's unsolvable, in order to go after and weaken public sector unions.
Let's bring it, though, take New York. And let's say you have a more sympathetic governor, and let's say in Governor Cuomo than you would in Walker or the Michigan governor. What does he do, or any governor for that matter, even if they're sympathetic and they try and honor agreements rather than just in the breach and say, okay, I got the Uticas, I got the Syracuses, I've got these cities who say to us, we can't make our nut here, Governor. What are we going to do? How many lifelines can he throw out before he says, it might be better just to reorganize and restructure this thing from jump instead of trying to fix it on the end?
You know, this past summer, the state legislature passed a proposal that the governor had introduced to set up a state financial restructuring board to work with localities who are deemed to be in a situation of fiscal stress to help them work through their problems. So I think that's a good place to start. addressing some of the long-term problems. It did make a modification in the way that binding arbitration, police and firefighters, works out. But it creates a forum to try and address these problems. I think, frankly, that the state of New York also needs to help out by increasing state aid to localities to address their own cash flow problems and so on.
But they're going to say, where's the money going to come from?
Well, I was on the governor's first tax reform commission, and I don't think this is a moment in New York State's economic recovery, which is still, getting back on its feet, when we should be cutting taxes.
And that's supposed to happen next year.
If we don't cut taxes, then I think we need to look at how we can, provide moderate increases in state aid to help localities.
Do you think Detroit should have raised their taxes then to pay these liabilities, or what would they have?
No.
And by the way, I just take two issues. Number one, I wouldn't say that they're being scapegoated. Number two, I would not put Wisconsin in the same arena right now as Detroit. From a political perspective, what you had as a governor trying to get out in front to avoid this issue in Wisconsin than Detroit. But it was brought up, though. But it was brought up, so I felt
Obie, let's
appropriate.
not characterize Walker here as heroic. He basically said, we have a deal, it's agreed to, I'm deciding to basically obliterate it. And he didn't even sit down and negotiate. So
what he did was right for the taxpayers of Wisconsin, and he was reelected.
This isn't about Wisconsin. I have a different question about New York. And in New York, is there an inevitability, though, that you think, frankly, we've seen migrations out of these cities, okay? And even if the taxes aren't lowered by Cuomo next year, is there a certain mathematics that just can't be avoided, that these cities just can't make it?
Cities are creations of the state. This should be viewed as a joint responsibility to help local governments in their finances. So if you have a state who's willing to do that, I think this is entirely addressable. It's not a crisis.
So we can manage Rust Belt cities.
There are no Detroits in New York because we don't have a governor like Michigan does.
All right.
But at the same time, though, one of the issues in Detroit was property taxes. As people fled the city, and the flight occurred, there wasn't the property tax base. And the mayor yesterday, when I saw him speaking, referred to the fact that there were a lot of liabilities out there on the property tax segment that they couldn't go collect anywhere, and they're still carried on the books that are 5-10 years old. I mean, that's just fiscal irresponsibility to begin with. So to sit here and say it's all about the unions.
Debating that there was fiscal irresponsibility in Detroit, and there was certainly more than mismanagement. There was graft. But all
10
that
years
said,
ago, I was doing casino development in Detroit. So prior to the more than 10 years ago at this point. And I remember driving downtown to go park at a hotel at night. I was out for dinner outside before at Townsend. And when I drove back, the streetlights weren't working back then. And I was afraid to stop at a stoplight without the streetlights. I just put my blinkers on, I slowed down, I looked around, and I went through. And if a cop pulled me over, I'd say, "Officer, thank you very much. I just didn't feel right stopping at the street here." And that was 12 years ago. This is not a Johnny-come-lately problem. This has been an ongoing problem that they refuse to address, and the unions need to step forward and take action before it gets to this point.
Keep in mind that the average pension that Detroit city government workers receive is $19,000. That is not the cause of the financial problems that Detroit is facing.
But it was the downturn in the economy.
Okay, but you believe, and this is on a hopeful note, that the problems of Detroit in microcosm, they're not going to be, people in New York shouldn't be worried that they're going to be coming to a city near them potentially?
There are fiscal problems at the state level, at the city level, that need to be addressed. They need to be addressed jointly. If we don't address them, if we keep kicking the can down the road, then we could be headed in that direction. But I think the fact that the state set up this financial restructuring board is a good indication that New York State is willing to identify these problems and to begin to address them.
Well, you're going to be sitting with a bunch of interesting people discussing this very issue in less than a half an hour, including Mr. Ravitch, as many remember here. Most recently from the Patterson years in New York as well here. Thank you very much, Mr. Parrott. Okay.
Thank you.
Coming up next on RFL, it has been hard to believe, but it's been almost 1 year since the massacre at Sandy Hook Elementary School in Newtown. And when we come back, we're going to talk about what has and really hasn't changed since then with our guests. Stay with us.